The moment Brenda Carmichael from the HOA shoved that violation notice into my mailbox during a blizzard, I knew my quiet life in Traverse City, Michigan was about to get complicated. I had just finished clearing my own driveway when I saw her stomping through knee-deep snow, her puffy purple jacket making her look like an overstuffed grape. She didn't even knock on my door, just jammed that bright orange paper into my mailbox and trudged back toward her Mercedes SUV that she'd left running in the middle of the street. My name is Greg Morrison, and I bought my house on Pinecrest Avenue 18 months ago. It was a modest 3-bedroom colonial with a decent yard and a 2-car garage. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first: quiet streets, well-maintained homes, and proximity to downtown. What they don't tell you when you move into these planned communities is that the HOA can turn your life into a bureaucratic nightmare faster than you can say property rights. I grabbed the notice from the mailbox, my fingers already going numb despite my insulated gloves. The paper was wet from the snow, but the words were clear enough. Violation notice: failure to maintain community standards during inclement weather. As per HOA bylaws section 7.3, all homeowners are required to clear snow from designated community walkways within 4 hours of snowfall cessation. You are hereby ordered to clear the walkway in front of 1247 Pinecrest Avenue, HOA President Residence, by 6:00 p.m. today, or face a fine of $200 per day. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. They wanted me to shovel the HOA president's walkway. I looked down the street at number 1247, which happened to be Brenda's own house. Her driveway was already pristine, probably cleared by a professional service, but the walkway from her driveway to her front door was indeed covered in about 8 inches of fresh powder. The thing was, I'd never gotten any documentation about being responsible for anyone else's property. When I closed on my house, the HOA packet mentioned maintaining my own property, paying quarterly dues, and following architectural guidelines for any exterior changes. Nothing about forced labor for the HOA president's personal convenience. I pulled out my phone and called the number listed on the violation notice. It rang 6 times before Brenda picked up. "HOA office," she answered in that nasally voice that already irritated me. "Brenda, this is Greg Morrison from 1189 Pinecrest. I just got this violation notice, and I think there's been some mistake." "No mistake, Mr. Morrison. The walkway assignments were distributed last month. You're responsible for 3 properties this winter, including mine." I never received any walkway assignments. I checked my mail religiously, and there was nothing. That's not my problem. The assignments were posted on the community bulletin board and emailed to all residents. Ignorance of HOA communications doesn't exempt you from compliance. I felt my jaw tighten. Even if I had received this assignment, which I didn't, there's nothing in my HOA agreement about shoveling other people's walkways. I reviewed every page before I bought this house. The board voted on new bylaws in November. All current bylaws are available on the HOA website. You can't retroactively change my contract without my consent. Actually, Mr. Morrison, if you'd read your purchase agreement, you'd know that the HOA board has the authority to amend bylaws with a simple majority vote. You agreed to abide by all current and future HOA regulations when you bought your property. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in my driveway, phone still pressed to my ear, watching the snow continue to fall. The blizzard hadn't even finished yet, and she was already threatening fines. I went inside and fired up my laptop. The HOA website was a poorly designed relic that looked like it had been built in 2003 and never updated. I navigated to the bylaws section and downloaded the most recent version, dated November 15th. Sure enough, there it was, buried in Section 7.3. The HOA board reserves the right to assign snow removal duties for community walkways to individual homeowners on a rotating basis. Failure to complete assigned duties within 4 hours of snowfall cessation will result in daily fines until compliance is achieved. The community walkways phrase was deliberately vague. Technically, every sidewalk could be considered a community walkway. This gave them carte blanche to make anyone shovel anything they wanted. I checked my email next. There was indeed a message from the HOA dated December 3rd with the subject line, "Winter Maintenance Assignments." It had gone straight to my spam folder because their email system was flagged by Gmail as potential phishing. I opened it and found a spreadsheet listing every homeowner and their assigned properties. I had somehow been assigned the HOA president's house, the vice president's house, and the treasurer's house. What a coincidence! The timing was suspicious, too. I'd spoken up at the November HOA meeting about the board's decision to raise quarterly dues by 40% to fund a new playground that nobody wanted. I was the only homeowner who'd actually read the playground proposal and pointed out that the quoted construction costs were nearly double the market rate. I'd suggested getting competitive bids, which Brenda had dismissed as unnecessary micromanagement of board decisions. Now I was on snow removal duty for all 3 board officers. This wasn't about community maintenance. It was retaliation. I looked outside at my truck, a 2019 Ford F-250 with a 7-foot plow blade attached to the front. I'd bought the plow setup last year when I lived in a rural area outside Traverse City. It made clearing my long driveway much faster than using a shovel. The truck was my pride and joy, and that plow had saved me countless hours of back-breaking work. An idea started forming in my mind. If they wanted me to clear Brenda's walkway, I'd clear it, just not in the way she expected. First, I needed to document everything. I took photos of the violation notice, screenshots of the bylaws, and pictures of my current property showing that my own walkway and driveway were completely clear. I also took photos of Brenda's house showing the snow-covered walkway. Then, I downloaded all my HOA documents and started reading through every single page of my purchase agreement and the master deed for the community. It took me 2 hours, but I found it. The master deed, which was recorded with the county and superseded any HOA bylaw, specifically stated that the HOA could not compel homeowners to perform unpaid labor for the benefit of individual homeowners. The language was clear. The HOA could require maintenance of common areas like the community clubhouse or the entrance sign, but they couldn't force me to shovel Brenda's personal walkway. The walkway in question ran from her driveway to her front door. It was entirely on her private property, not a shared common area. The bylaws they'd passed in November were actually in violation of the master deed. Armed with this information, I called a lawyer. My friend Derek had used a real estate attorney named Patricia Simmons when he'd fought his own HOA over a fence dispute. I left a message with her office explaining the situation and asking for a consultation. Then I looked at the clock. It was 4:30 p.m. The violation notice gave me until 6:00 p.m. to clear Brenda's walkway. The snow had finally stopped falling around 3:00 p.m., leaving us with about 11 inches of accumulation. It was perfect packing snow, heavy and wet. I bundled back up in my winter gear, grabbed my phone, and headed out to my truck. The engine roared to life, and I let it warm up while I double-checked that my phone was recording video. I wanted documentation of everything I was about to do. I drove slowly down Pinecrest Avenue toward Brenda's house. Her Mercedes was parked in her pristine driveway, and I could see lights on inside. I pulled up in front of her house and climbed out, making sure my phone was positioned to capture everything. The walkway from her driveway to her front door was about 30 feet long and 4 feet wide. I grabbed the shovel from the bed of my truck and started clearing the snow, tossing it onto her front lawn on either side of the walkway. I worked methodically, making sure to get right down to the concrete. Within 20 minutes, the walkway was completely clear, and I had removed every speck of snow from the path. I took more photos and video showing the cleared walkway. The timestamp on my phone showed 5:15 p.m., well before the 6 p.m. deadline. I had complied with their ridiculous demand to the letter. Then came the fun part. I climbed back into my truck, positioned it at the end of Brenda's driveway, and lowered the plow blade. I put the truck in gear and drove forward, angling the blade so that it pushed the massive pile of snow from her driveway directly onto the walkway I had just cleared. I made 3 passes, ensuring that the walkway was now buried under about 2 feet of densely packed snow, even more than had been there originally. I raised the plow blade, backed out onto the street and parked. My phone had recorded the entire operation. I had cleared the walkway as demanded. What happened after I completed my assigned task was outside the scope of their bylaw. I was back home within 5 minutes. I backed my truck into the garage, unhooked the plow, and went inside to warm up. My hands were freezing and I needed coffee. I had barely started the coffee maker when someone started pounding on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw Brenda, her face red with either cold or rage, probably both. I opened the door but left the storm door closed and locked. "Can I help you? What the hell did you just do?" she screamed. "My walkway is buried under 3 feet of snow." I cleared it as instructed. "I have video evidence showing the walkway was completely clear at 5:15 p.m., 45 minutes before your deadline. You plowed snow right back onto it after I completed my assigned task." The violation notice said I needed to clear the walkway by 6 p.m. I did that. There's nothing in the bylaws about what I do with my truck after completing my assignment. This is deliberately destructive behavior. I'm fining you $500 for vandalism. Actually, Brenda, you can't do that. I consulted the master deed this afternoon, and it turns out the board's new snow removal bylaw is invalid. The master deed prohibits compelling homeowners to perform unpaid labor for the benefit of individual homeowners. Your walkway is on your private property, not a common area. The bylaw itself is illegal. Her face went from red to purple. That's not your interpretation to make. I've already contacted a real estate attorney. I'll be filing a formal challenge to the bylaw and demanding reimbursement for the time I spent today complying with an invalid rule. I'll also be requesting copies of the board meeting minutes where this bylaw was discussed and voted on. I'm curious to see if proper notice was given to all homeowners and if the meeting followed the procedures outlined in the HOA governing documents. "You're making a huge mistake," she said, her voice dropping to something that was probably meant to be menacing. "The board has ways of making life very difficult for homeowners who don't cooperate." Is that a threat? Because I'm recording this conversation, and threatening homeowners is definitely grounds for removal from the board. She turned and stomped back toward her buried walkway. I watched her try to navigate through the snow pile in her fashionable but impractical boots. She nearly fell twice before reaching her driveway. I closed the door and went back to my coffee. My phone rang almost immediately. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hello, Mr. Morrison. This is Patricia Simmons returning your call. Derek Paulson gave me a heads up that you might be dealing with an HOA issue. I explained the entire situation while she listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. This is actually a pretty clear-cut case, she finally said. The master deed supersedes any bylaw the board passes. If they're requiring you to maintain private property belonging to board members, that's a violation of the master deed and potentially a form of corruption. I'd like to send the board a cease and desist letter and demand they rescind the snow removal bylaw. If they refuse, we can file for injunctive relief with the county court. What about the retaliation? I spoke up at a meeting, and suddenly I'm assigned to clear snow for all 3 board officers. That's even better for your case. Retaliatory enforcement of HOA rules is illegal in Michigan. If we can establish a pattern of retaliation, you could potentially recover damages and attorney fees. Do you have documentation of your participation in that November meeting? The HOA is supposed to keep minutes of all meetings. I can request copies. Do that. In the meantime, I'll draft the cease and desist letter tonight and send it via certified mail tomorrow. Don't comply with any more of their snow removal demands. Let them fine you. It'll strengthen our case. We discussed her fees, which were reasonable, and I agreed to retain her services. After hanging up, I felt significantly better about the situation. I wasn't just some random homeowner they could push around. I had documentation, legal backing, and a clear case that they'd overstepped their authority. The next morning, I woke up to find another violation notice in my mailbox. This one cited me for destruction of HOA officer property and levied a $500 fine due immediately. Attached was a demand that I clear Brenda's walkway again by noon or face an additional $200 per day in fines. I photographed the notice and emailed it to Patricia. Then I made myself breakfast and went about my day. At 11:45 a.m., Brenda appeared in my driveway with 2 other board members, Carl Henderson and Margaret Foster. Carl was the vice president, a retired accountant who took his HOA role way too seriously. Margaret was the treasurer, a real estate agent who apparently had too much free time. I opened the door before they could knock. "We're here to discuss your continued violations," Brenda announced, holding a clipboard like it gave her official authority. "I'm not discussing anything without my attorney present. All communication needs to go through Patricia Simmons at Norton and Associates." "We're trying to resolve this neighborly," Carl said in that condescending tone that made me want to punch him. "If you just cooperate with the winter maintenance program, we could avoid all this unpleasantness. There's nothing to resolve. Your bylaw violates the master deed. You don't have the authority to assign maintenance of private property to other homeowners. My attorney has already prepared a cease and desist letter that you'll receive in a few days. So you're refusing to comply with HOA regulations?" Margaret asked, making a note on her own clipboard. "I'm refusing to comply with invalid regulations that violate the recorded master deed." "There's a difference. We'll see what the judge says about that," Brenda said. "We're prepared to put a lien on your property for unpaid fines. And I'm prepared to sue the HOA and each of you individually for harassment and illegal retaliation. Do what you need to do." They left, and I watched them huddle in Brenda's driveway, probably plotting their next move. I didn't care. I had the law on my side. Over the next week, things escalated. I received daily violation notices for increasingly absurd infractions. My mailbox was positioned 3 inches too far from the curb. My house numbers were the wrong font. My garbage cans were visible from the street for 12 minutes longer than the permitted time on trash day. Each violation came with a fine ranging from $50 to $200. Patricia sent the cease and desist letter as promised. She also filed a formal complaint with the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, which oversees HOA disputes. Additionally, she requested all board meeting minutes and financial records for the past 2 years under Michigan's HOA disclosure laws. The board's response was to schedule a hearing for my continued pattern of violations and threatened to sue me for the accumulated fines, which now totaled over $2,000. The hearing was scheduled for January 15th at the community clubhouse. Patricia advised me to attend and let her do most of the talking. She also suggested I bring any other homeowners who might have similar grievances with the board. I spent the next few days talking to my neighbors. It turned out I wasn't the only one dealing with retaliation. My neighbor to the left, Sam Porter, had been cited for having the wrong shade of exterior paint, even though his house had been professionally painted to match the original color. The homeowner across the street, Jennifer Wu, had been fined for parking her work van in her own driveway because the board decided commercial vehicles were now prohibited, despite no such restriction existing when she bought her house. There were 6 of us by the time the hearing rolled around, all with similar stories of retroactive rules and petty enforcement. Patricia told us this was perfect. A pattern of abuse would be much harder for the board to defend. The night of the hearing was bitterly cold. The clubhouse was a small brick building near the neighborhood entrance with a meeting room that could hold about 40 people. When we arrived at 7:00 p.m., the parking lot was surprisingly full. Apparently word had spread, and other homeowners were curious about what was happening. Inside, the board sat at a long table at the front of the room. Brenda was in the center, flanked by Carl and Margaret. They had name placards in front of them and looked very official. About 30 other homeowners filled the folding chairs facing the board. Patricia and I sat in the front row. She had a leather briefcase full of documents and a legal pad covered in notes. She looked calm and professional in her dark suit, while I felt like I was about to participate in a bad high school mock trial. Brenda called the meeting to order at 7:05 p.m. We're here tonight to address the multiple violations committed by Mr. Greg Morrison and to determine appropriate sanctions. Mr. Morrison, you have the right to address the board before we make our decision. Patricia stood. Patricia Simmons, attorney for Mr. Morrison. Before we proceed, I need to raise several procedural issues. First, was proper notice given for this hearing per the HOA bylaws? Brenda looked annoyed. Notice was emailed to Mr. Morrison last week. The bylaws require 10 days written notice sent via certified mail for any hearing that could result in sanctions. An email does not satisfy this requirement. This hearing is procedurally invalid. We're not going to get bogged down in technicalities, Carl interjected. These aren't technicalities. They're fundamental due process requirements in your own governing documents. Second, the board is proposing sanctions for violations of bylaws that directly contradict the recorded master deed. I have copies of the master deed here, which I've already provided to the board. The master deed prohibits compelling homeowners to maintain private property belonging to other homeowners. Your snow removal bylaw is invalid. That's your opinion, Margaret said. It's not an opinion. It's a legal fact. The master deed was recorded with Grand Traverse County in 1998. It can only be amended by a supermajority vote of all homeowners, not by the board. Any bylaw that contradicts it is void. The room erupted in whispered conversations. Many of the homeowners hadn't known about this legal hierarchy. Brenda banged a gavel, which seemed overly dramatic for an HOA hearing. The board has consulted with our attorney, and we believe the bylaw is valid. The master deed allows the board to establish maintenance requirements. For common areas, yes. Not for private property. Mr. Morrison was ordered to clear the walkway on your private property, President Carmichael. That's not a common area. It serves the community by ensuring safe access, Brenda countered, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. Safe access to your private residence is your responsibility, not Mr. Morrison's. Furthermore, the pattern of violations issued to Mr. Morrison is clearly retaliatory. He spoke against a board proposal in November, and within weeks, he was assigned snow removal duties for all 3 board officers and has since received 14 violation notices for minor or non-existent infractions. This is textbook retaliation, which is illegal under Michigan law. Patricia pulled out a document and held it up. I have a letter here from the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. They've opened an investigation into this HOA based on complaints from multiple homeowners regarding arbitrary enforcement, retaliatory violations, and financial irregularities. That got everyone's attention. Brenda's face went pale, and Carl started shuffling papers nervously. What financial irregularities? Someone called from the back of the room. Patricia smiled. I was hoping someone would ask. As part of discovery, I requested the HOA's financial records. The records show that the board approved a contract with Carmichael Landscaping for $45,000 to install the new playground. Carmichael Landscaping is owned by President Carmichael's husband. The contract was approved without competitive bidding and at a cost roughly double the market rate. This appears to be a conflict of interest and possible embezzlement of HOA funds. The room exploded. Homeowners were shouting questions, and several people were already pulling out their phones to document what was being said. Brenda stood up, her face now bright red. This is slander. My husband's company gave us a fair bid. Then you should have gotten competing bids to prove that. Instead, you pushed through the contract without homeowner input and raised dues 40% to fund it. That's why Mr. Morrison questioned it in November, and that's why you retaliated against him. A man in the third row stood up. I move that we hold an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board. Several people seconded the motion. Brenda tried to regain control, but the meeting had devolved into chaos. Patricia leaned over to me and whispered, "This is going better than I expected." For the next hour, the meeting turned into a referendum on the board's leadership. Patricia presented documentation of multiple questionable financial decisions, including consulting fees paid to Margaret's real estate firm for community enhancement planning that consisted of her suggesting we repaint the entrance sign. There were payments to Carl's son's snow removal company at premium rates, despite several homeowners offering to do the work for less. The more Patricia revealed, the angrier the homeowners became. It became clear that this wasn't just about my snow removal dispute. The board had been using their positions to funnel HOA money to themselves and their families for months. By 9:00 p.m., the homeowners had voted to remove all 3 board officers and schedule a special election for new leadership. Brenda, Carl, and Margaret stormed out of the clubhouse, threatening legal action against everyone involved. Patricia assured the remaining homeowners that the vote was valid and that she would help establish a transitional board to manage affairs until the election. Several homeowners volunteered, and within 30 minutes we had a functioning interim board committed to transparency and following the actual governing documents. I felt like a weight had been lifted. The harassment would stop, and the HOA might actually function the way it was supposed to. But Brenda wasn't done yet. 2 days after the meeting, I came home from work to find my mailbox had been ripped out of the ground and thrown into my yard. Someone had also spray-painted "Traitor" across my garage door in red paint. I called the police immediately. Officer Mike Randolph arrived within 20 minutes and took a report. He photographed the damage and collected the spray paint cans that had been left in my driveway. They were cheap cans from the hardware store, the kind you can buy without much scrutiny. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" Officer Randolph asked. "I have a pretty good idea. I'm in a dispute with my HOA and the board was just removed after I exposed financial irregularities. The former president lives 4 houses down. Brenda Carmichael, you know her. She's called the department a few times over the years. Noise complaints, parking issues, that sort of thing. Usually nothing that requires police involvement. Well, this requires police involvement. That's destruction of property and vandalism." "I agree. I'll go talk to her, see what she says." Officer Randolph left, and I spent the next hour cleaning red spray paint off my white garage door. It took 3 applications of paint thinner and a lot of scrubbing, but I eventually got most of it off. I'd need to repaint, but at least the word "Traitor" was no longer visible from the street. The mailbox was a total loss. The post had been bent and cracked, and the mailbox itself was dented beyond repair. I'd have to buy a new one and install it, which would cost at least $150 when I factored in materials and the concrete for the post. Officer Randolph returned about an hour later. I spoke with Mrs. Carmichael. She denies any involvement and says she was home all evening. Her husband corroborates her alibi. Of course he does. "Did you ask about the spray paint?" She says she doesn't know anything about it. Without evidence directly linking her to the vandalism, there's not much I can do right now. But I've filed a report, and if anything else happens, we'll have documentation of a pattern. It wasn't the resolution I wanted, but it was better than nothing. I thanked Officer Randolph and went back to dealing with the mess. Over the next few weeks, strange things kept happening. My trash cans would be knocked over the night before pickup. Someone kept parking in front of my driveway, blocking me in. I received several anonymous letters threatening legal action and calling me various creative insults. Patricia advised me to document everything and install security cameras. I bought a system with 4 cameras covering all angles of my property. The cameras recorded continuously to a cloud server, so even if someone destroyed them, I'd have footage. The cameras paid off within 3 days. At 2:37 a.m. on a Tuesday, my cameras captured Brenda's Mercedes slowly driving past my house. The car stopped, a passenger door opened, and someone threw a bag of garbage onto my front lawn. The car then drove away. The camera got a clear shot of the license plate. I downloaded the footage and sent it to Officer Randolph. I also sent a copy to Patricia, who immediately filed for a restraining order against Brenda. The police took the new evidence more seriously. Brenda was brought in for questioning and eventually charged with misdemeanor vandalism and harassment. She tried to claim it was her husband driving and that she didn't know he was going to throw garbage on my lawn, but the cameras had captured enough detail to show a female figure in the driver's seat. The restraining order was granted, prohibiting Brenda from coming within 500 feet of my property. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the damaged mailbox and the cost of cleaning my garage door. But the legal troubles for the former board were just beginning. The Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs completed their investigation and found multiple violations of HOA management laws. The contract with Carmichael Landscaping was determined to be a conflict of interest that should have been disclosed and put to a homeowner vote. The consulting fees paid to Margaret's real estate firm were found to be for services that were never actually performed. The state referred the case to the Grand Traverse County Prosecutor's Office for potential criminal charges. By March, Brenda, Carl, and Margaret were all facing charges of embezzlement and fraud. The prosecution alleged they had collectively diverted over $80,000 in HOA funds for personal benefit over an 18-month period. The interim board hired a forensic accountant to audit the HOA's finances. The results were worse than anyone expected. Beyond the obvious conflicts of interest, there were mysterious cash withdrawals, payments to shell companies, and credit card charges for personal expenses. The former board had treated the HOA like their personal piggy bank. The homeowners filed a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. Patricia represented our HOA in the suit, and she was confident we'd win significant damages plus attorney fees. Meanwhile, life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The new board, led by a retired teacher named Susan Fairfield, was committed to transparency and following the actual rules. They rescinded the invalid snow removal bylaw and several other problematic rules that the previous board had passed. They also implemented a requirement that all board decisions be made in open meetings with proper notice and homeowner input. My relationship with my neighbors improved dramatically. Several people apologized for not speaking up earlier when they saw what was happening. We formed a neighborhood watch to prevent any future vandalism, and there was a general sense that we'd all learned something about the importance of oversight and accountability. The criminal trial for the former board members began in June. I was called as a witness to testify about the snow removal incident and how I'd first started questioning the board's financial decisions. The courtroom was packed with homeowners wanting to see justice served. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Bank records, emails, testimony from vendors who'd been asked to inflate invoices so the board could pocket the difference. Brenda's husband admitted under oath that his landscaping company had charged $45,000 for work that should have cost $20,000, and that Brenda had assured him it was fine because the HOA had plenty of money. The defense tried to argue that these were simple misunderstandings and poor bookkeeping rather than intentional crimes, but the sheer volume of questionable transactions made that defense laughable. After a 3-week trial, all 3 defendants were found guilty. Brenda received 18 months in county jail and 5 years probation. She was also ordered to pay $62,000 in restitution, her share of the stolen funds. Carl got 12 months and paid back $15,000. Margaret got 9 months and owed $8,000. The sentences felt light to me given what they'd done, but Patricia explained that first-time white-collar offenders rarely get significant prison time unless the amounts involved are much larger. The important thing was that they'd been held accountable and would have criminal records that would follow them forever. The civil lawsuit settled before going to trial. The 3 former board members agreed to pay a total of $95,000 in damages, which would be split among the homeowners based on the dues they'd paid during the period of the fraud. I received a check for $487, which wasn't life-changing money but felt satisfying nonetheless. Brenda's house went up for sale in August. She and her husband moved somewhere out of state, I heard Florida. Carl and Margaret also left the neighborhood within months of their convictions. It was probably for the best. Facing your victims every day couldn't have been pleasant. By September, the neighborhood had genuinely moved on. The new board had stabilized the HOA's finances, reduced the dues back to reasonable levels, and actually completed some useful improvements like repaving several streets and upgrading the entrance lighting. They ran the HOA like a normal community organization rather than a personal fiefdom. I kept my security cameras up. Once you've been through something like that, you don't take chances. But I never had another problem. My mailbox stayed intact, my garage door stayed clean, and nobody demanded I shovel their walkway. Looking back on the whole mess, I'm proud that I stood up to them. It would have been easier to just comply, to shovel Brenda's walkway and keep my head down. But that kind of petty tyranny only works when people are too intimidated or apathetic to fight back. The moment you shine a light on corruption and hold people accountable, it falls apart. The snow removal incident that started everything had become legendary in the neighborhood. New homeowners would hear the story about the guy who plowed snow right back onto the HOA president's walkway and sparked a criminal investigation. It was usually told with a mixture of amusement and admiration. My neighbors started calling me the snow plow vigilante, which I found hilarious. I'd made T-shirts printed with that phrase as Christmas gifts that year, and they were a huge hit at the neighborhood holiday party. Susan, our new HOA president, gave a speech at that party about the importance of community and transparency. She thanked everyone who'd stood up against the corruption and emphasized that the HOA was meant to serve the homeowners, not the other way around. It was night and day compared to the previous administration. I finally felt like I'd made the right decision buying a house on Pinecrest Avenue. Without Brenda and her cronies poisoning the atmosphere, it really was a nice neighborhood. The houses were well maintained, the streets were quiet, and the people were friendly. Patricia sent me a final bill for her services in October. The total came to $8,400, but since we'd won the civil suit, the defendants had to pay my attorney fees as part of the settlement. I wrote her a thank you note along with the payment, expressing my gratitude for her expertise and willingness to take on the case. She wrote back saying it had been one of the most satisfying cases of her career, because the good guys had actually won. As winter approached again, I made sure my plow blade was properly maintained and ready for snow season. This time, I'd only be plowing my own driveway. The new board had hired a professional service to handle the common areas, funded by a modest increase in dues that had been properly proposed, discussed, and voted on by homeowners. The first significant snow came in late November. I was out early clearing my driveway when Susan drove past and waved. A few minutes later, Sam came out to snowblow his driveway, and we chatted about the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. It was peaceful and normal, exactly what suburban life should be. I never saw Brenda again. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she tried to fight the restitution payments and ended up having her wages garnished. Her marriage apparently didn't survive the criminal conviction and financial strain. I didn't take pleasure in her misery, but I also didn't feel particularly sorry for her. She'd brought it all on herself through greed and vindictiveness. Carl and Margaret dropped off the radar completely. Neither maintained any social media presence, and they seemed determined to disappear from public view. Given their criminal records, finding work in their previous fields was probably difficult. I hoped they'd learned something from the experience, but I wasn't optimistic. The true test of the new board came in March when they had to make a difficult decision about a special assessment for emergency roof repairs to the clubhouse. The old board would have just imposed the fee and sent out bills. Susan's board instead called a special meeting, presented 3 different repair options with costs, and let the homeowners vote on which approach to take. It cost more in the short term to do it properly, but everyone felt heard and respected. That's really what the whole fight had been about. Respect. Brenda and her board had treated the homeowners like subjects to be ruled rather than neighbors to be served. They'd forgotten that an HOA is supposed to be a democratic organization where homeowners have a voice. When they tried to silence that voice with petty retaliation and illegal fines, they set in motion their own downfall. My house value had actually increased despite all the drama. The neighborhood's reputation had improved once word spread that we'd cleaned house and established proper oversight. Potential buyers saw it as a well-managed community with engaged homeowners, which was attractive in the real estate market. I had no plans to move. This was my home, and I'd fought for it. The colonial with the decent yard and two-car garage had proven to be exactly what I wanted. The HOA drama had been an unexpected adventure, but we'd come out the other side stronger. Every time it snowed, I'd look down the street at 1247 Pinecrest Avenue, now occupied by a young couple with a toddler. They had a small plow service that cleared their driveway and walkway, and they waved whenever they saw me. It was such a stark contrast to Brenda's hostile presence. I'd learned a lot from the experience. I learned to read every document before signing, to question authority when something doesn't seem right, and to stand up for principles even when it's uncomfortable. I learned that corruption thrives in darkness and dies in sunlight. Most importantly, I learned that community is worth fighting for. The story could have ended much differently. If I just shoveled Brenda's walkway that day and accepted the new bylaws, the financial fraud might have continued for years. The board would have become more brazen, and more HOA money would have disappeared. Other homeowners would have suffered under increasingly arbitrary rules. Instead, one act of creative defiance with a snow plow had exposed everything. It had been risky. I could have lost if I'd been wrong about the master deed, or if the board had been more competent at covering their tracks. But sometimes you have to take risks to do what's right. My security cameras still recorded every day, storing footage in the cloud. I checked them occasionally, but there was never anything interesting. Just neighbors walking dogs, kids riding bikes, and the normal rhythms of suburban life. It was boring and beautiful. Patricia called me in April to let me know the last of the restitution payments had been received. The HOA's finances were finally back in order, with reserves rebuilt and all legitimate expenses paid. We'd survived the crisis and come out healthier on the other side. "You should run for the board," she said. "You've got good judgment and you're not afraid to ask hard questions." I laughed. "I think I've had enough HOA drama for one lifetime. I'm happy to let Susan and her team handle it." "Fair enough. But if you ever change your mind, you'd have my vote." I appreciated the sentiment, but I meant what I said. Being a regular homeowner who showed up to meetings and stayed informed was enough for me. Let someone else deal with the budget meetings and compliance issues. Summer came, and the neighborhood held a community barbecue. Susan's interim board had become the permanent board after running unopposed in the special election, which showed how satisfied everyone was with their leadership. The barbecue was packed, with families enjoying burgers and watching kids run around the clubhouse lawn. Jennifer Wu found me near the grill. "I never properly thanked you for what you did. If you hadn't fought back, I'd probably have been fined into selling my house over that commercial vehicle nonsense." "We all benefited," I said. "It wasn't just me." "But you were the first one to really push back. That matters." She was right, though I hadn't thought of it that way. Being the first person to stand up had given others permission to do the same. That's how these things work. One person breaks the spell of intimidation, and suddenly everyone realizes the emperor has no clothes. As fall returned and the leaves began to change, I reflected on the past year. It had been stressful and expensive and time-consuming. but it had also been worthwhile. The neighborhood was genuinely better now. The HOA functioned properly. People trusted each other and worked together, and I never had to shovel anyone else's walkway ever again. The vindication had been sweet, watching Brenda's schemes unravel and justice being served. But the real satisfaction came from the quiet normalcy that followed. No more violation notices. No more harassment. No more checking my security cameras every morning to see what fresh hell had been delivered overnight. Just a normal house in a normal neighborhood, with a normal HOA that did its job without drama or corruption. That November marked 1 year since the infamous board meeting where the 40% dues increase had been proposed. The new board held a ceremony at the clubhouse to celebrate the HOA's recovery and to recognize homeowners who'd stepped up during the crisis. They gave me a plaque that read, "In recognition of outstanding service to the Pinecrest Avenue community." It was made of cheap wood and the engraving was slightly crooked, but I hung it in my garage right next to where Trader had been spray painted. It seemed appropriate. Susan gave another speech about vigilance and community engagement. "We can never let this happen again," she said. "Not here, not anywhere. HOAs are only as good as the people who run them and the homeowners who pay attention. We all learned that lesson the hard way." Everyone applauded, and we ate cake and talked about normal things like holiday plans and the upcoming winter. It felt right. It felt like closure. As I drove home that evening, I passed 1247 Pinecrest Avenue. The young couple had put up Halloween decorations, plastic pumpkins and fake spider webs. Their toddler was visible through the front window, probably getting ready for bed. It looked like a happy home. I parked in my garage and sat in my truck for a moment, just appreciating the peace. My house, my rules, my sanctuary. Exactly as it should be. The snow plow blade was already attached to my truck, ready for winter. I'd only use it on my own property this year, clearing my own driveway and maybe helping out elderly neighbors who couldn't manage the heavy lifting. That's what community is supposed to be. People helping each other because they want to, not because some petty tyrant demands it. I thought about Brenda sitting in county jail, probably bitter and convinced she'd done nothing wrong. People like that rarely learn. They see themselves as victims even when they're clearly perpetrators. She'd probably tell her version of the story for years, casting herself as the wronged party persecuted by ungrateful homeowners. Let her. The truth was documented in court records, news articles, and the collective memory of everyone who'd lived through it. History would not be kind to Brenda Carmichael and her corrupt little board. As for me, I was just Greg Morrison, regular homeowner, snow plow operator, and accidental neighborhood hero. I'd done what needed to be done, and now I was enjoying the fruits of that victory. A peaceful neighborhood, fair leadership, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd made a difference. The next time it snowed, I'd be out early with my plow, clearing my driveway efficiently and thoroughly. I'd wave to my neighbors as they did the same. And if anyone ever again suggested I should shovel the HOA president's walkway, I'd laugh and tell them the story of how that worked out the last time. Because some lessons need to be learned the hard way, and Pinecrest Avenue HOA had certainly learned theirs. Treat homeowners with respect, follow the rules, and never underestimate someone with a snow plow and a functioning knowledge of contract law. That was the legacy of the great HOA snow removal rebellion, and it was a legacy I was proud to have created. Not through violence or destruction, but through standing up for what was right and refusing to be bullied by people who'd forgotten they were supposed to serve, not rule. The neighborhood had been tested and had emerged stronger. The HOA had been reformed and now functioned as intended. Justice had been served, restitution had been paid, and the guilty had faced consequences. Everything was exactly as it should be, and I could finally relax in my home without worrying about what fresh insanity would arrive in my mailbox each day. That peace of mind was worth every hour I'd spent fighting, every dollar in legal fees, and every moment of stress. I'd bought a house in Traverse City hoping for a quiet place to build a life. I'd gotten more than I bargained for, but in the end, I'd gotten exactly what I wanted. A home, a community, and the knowledge that when pushed, I could push back effectively. The snow plow sat ready in my garage, a silent reminder of how this had all started. Just a simple tool, used in a moment of creative defiance that had changed everything. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person refusing to accept the unacceptable, and suddenly the whole house of cards collapses. I walked into my house, made dinner, and settled in for a quiet evening. Outside, Pinecrest Avenue was peaceful. Lights glowed in windows, families went about their lives, and the neighborhood thrived under leadership that actually cared about the people they served. It was just another evening in suburban Michigan, but it felt like victory. And that made all the difference.